Hey, I'm John, and I want to share a little experience I had about 15 years ago that impacted me in a pretty major way. I try to remember it whenever I can. I don't always do a great job, but whenever I do, it really puts things in perspective for me. So I want to share it with you guys in hopes that it can impact somebody even a little bit. It's about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I had a son. He was about 3 years old. And his mom and I had separated. I lived in Orlando. She lived in the Boston area. And we had shared custody. She had him 6 weeks. I would have him 2 weeks. And we'd go back and forth every 6 weeks. She'd have him 6, I'd have him 2. She'd have him 6, I'd have him 2, and so on and so forth. When I had him for 2 weeks, and then he went home for 6, it was really tough for me. I was like a zombie walking around the house for several days. And this one time he was going to start school, and I wasn't going to see him for like 12 weeks. And the whole 2 weeks that I had him, I was fixated on the thought that I wasn't going to see him for 12 weeks. And I didn't even enjoy those 2 weeks with him. So we got on a flight. I was bringing him back to Boston, and it was a Southwest flight. And if you've ever flown Southwest, you know that there's A, B, and C seating. There's no assigned seats. It's just by category or by group. And him and I got on first, and there was a lady next to the window, myself in the middle seat, and my son was on the aisle seat. It's about a 3-hour flight from Orlando to Boston. And I remember this because I remember talking to my son the whole time thinking, man, I'm not going to see him for 12 weeks. And I was just eating up every second I could with him. And the pilot got on the intercom and said we began our initial descent into Boston. We have about 15 minutes left in the flight. And as soon as he said that, the lady that was sitting next to me, who hadn't said a word to me the entire flight, she turned to me and she said, so do you live in Orlando or Boston? And I said, well, I live in Orlando now. I'm from Boston originally, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, oh, you're so lucky. We just went to Orlando and we had the greatest time ever. We went to Disney World. We went to Universal. We got to meet Spider-Man and Cinderella and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, lady, I only got like 10 minutes left with my son here. If you only knew what I was going through, you wouldn't be telling me about your perfect little family vacation. But I'm a pretty nice guy, so I entertained her and, oh, that's awesome. That's great. And the husband and the 2 daughters were behind us. Now, keep in mind, this is before everyone had a cell phone in their pocket. He popped over the seat and he said, hey, I just heard you talking about meeting Spider-Man. Here it is right here. We're watching. He had one of those camcorders that flip out on the side, the little screen there. And he shows me a video of him and the 2 daughters meeting Spider-Man. And I'm like, wow, cool. It's a guy in a costume, but all right. But by this point, I'm getting a little irritated because now I have like just 7 or 8 minutes left with my son, and I'm having to pretend to care about their perfect little family vacation. And I look back, and he's watching the video with his 2 daughters now, and they're just all smiles. And so I said to the mom, I said, did you guys stay at a Disney property or Universal property? Because when you go to Orlando, if you've ever been, you know half the experience is staying in a cool hotel. And she leaned into me and she said, no, we stayed at a place called Give Kids the World. If you don't know what Give Kids the World is, it's a village down in Kissimmee, Florida, right outside Orlando for terminally ill children where families can bring their children. And I looked at her and I said, Give Kids the World? And she said, she leaned in close and she said, they just gave my daughter about 6 weeks. Now here I am, upset because they're taking a little bit of my time, and I'm thinking, you don't know what I'm going through. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. Truth is, I had no idea what they were going through, what they were dealing with. And as soon as she said that, I looked back like this, and I saw them all smiling, just happy, genuinely happy that they had this great experience. Because that father knew in 2 months he wasn't going to be able to have that experience with his daughter. And I felt about this big. Granted, they didn't know what I was thinking, but I knew, and that was enough. I believe that God put me in that seat that day for a reason, because I got back on a flight back to Orlando that night. My situation wasn't perfect. Sure, I was going to miss my son, but I was reminded that I had a perfectly healthy son, and that made that trip back. I smiled. I smiled on the trip back that I was fortunate that I had a healthy son. That impacted me so much that I actually have a tattoo on my forearm here. If you can see it, it says perspective. Because anytime I'm faced with any type of adversity in my life, any type of issue, I try to remember that it's just an issue and not a real problem. Do we have problems? Sure, we all have problems. But a lot of the times, what we think are problems are really issues that are temporary. It can be resolved. As I make this video right now, there's a hospital less than 5 miles down the road from where I live. And in that hospital, I know that there's children watching their parents go through chemotherapy. There's children that have heard that their parents have gone on. Even worse, there's parents that are watching their children go through chemotherapy. This is going to sound morbid, but there's parents out there right now that are planning their child's funeral. So I say that to you to say, if there's something in your life that's bothering you, granted, we all have issues, every single one of us. I'm not saying walk around with a smile on your face all day, but keep it in perspective. And try to remember that somebody always has it worse. And it's not to take somebody who's worse off than you and use that as a gauge for your happiness. But the truth is, it can always be worse. That's my story. I wish I knew who that family was, because they impacted my life in such a big way. So if they ever watch this, I'm sorry you went through what you did, but I thank you for being uplifting that day and not down, and you changed my life in a big way. Now listen, we all have issues. We all have problems, but a lot of the times, like I said, problems are just minor issues that can be resolved. So I'm not saying that everyone, walk around with a smile on your face all day. There's things we have to address all the time. It happens, that's life. But try to keep your problems or your issues in perspective, because someone always has it worse. And I'm not saying that to say, look at somebody less fortunate, use that as a gauge for your own happiness. No, I'm saying that to say, remember how fortunate we all are. Every single one of us, we have things that we can smile about all the time. And we have issues that can be resolved. Me, that day changed my life, and I hope that it changes yours too.